So you've probably seen Taylor Swift's new album release video, but did you notice the subtle art references hidden inside of it? Most fans caught the obvious clues, but the subtle Easter eggs drawn from famous artworks and artists slipped right past. And if you miss those, you're not just skipping details, you're missing the entire story that Taylor is trying to tell through her music. In this breakdown, I will show you every hidden reference, explain the meaning behind the artworks, and reveal what it adds to the story she's trying to tell with her album. So by the end of this video, you'll see the album in a completely new light, and you won't be left behind when your friends and fellow Swifties are dissecting the clues. And I'll also give you my personal predictions on what I think is really going on here. Most people were so focused on the 4 TS books that were scattered behind her that nobody bothered to read the titles of the other books. And when you look just over her shoulder, there's a whole mess of clues just staring you in the face. So this is part 1, numerology and hidden patterns. Now, to give some context for any art lovers that have stumbled onto this video that might not be super familiar with the Taylor Swift lore, there's some really important numbers and dates that you need to know. So the number 12 is really important because this is her 12th studio album, and 12 is a really big deal because she announced it at 12:12 p.m. on August the 12th. So that brings up our other number, 8. August is the 8th month, so 8 kind of floats around here a lot. And the most important number in her whole Easter egg world is the number 13. It's her favorite number. She used to write on the back of her hand at shows. It's a whole thing. So as long as you keep those 3 numbers in mind and the month of August, a lot of this is going to click in as we go along. So let's start off with the book that's right behind her shoulder. It's red and it says Basquiat. So Basquiat is an artist. His full name is Jean-Michel Basquiat, and he's really famous for the art that he made in New York City in the 1980s. And you might recognize him from his really cool crown symbol that he created. It's become a whole identity of its own outside of his artwork. Sadly, he passed away young on August the 12th, which is our first clue. August the 12th is also the date that, like I just said, she released the album. He's not the only person that passed away in the month of August on this bookshelf. Now, 2 books down from Jean-Michel is an artist named Ruth Asawa. Now, she's a really cool sculptor that makes these big, swirly, curly wire sculptures, and a lot of them hang, which are my personal favorite ones. And she sadly also passed away in the month of August at the age of 87. Now, Taylor did explicitly say, and I'll run the clip,
I'm never going to plant an Easter egg that ties back to my personal life. It's always going to be towards music.
That she never creates Easter eggs explicitly for her personal life. Everything is only to do with music and upcoming announcements. But 87 is the number that Travis Kelce wears on his jersey on the Chiefs. So maybe we take her word for it that nothing points to her personal life, but sometimes coincidences aren't coincidences. I mean, the guy was sat right next to her in the video, and spoiler alert, if anybody hasn't heard right now, you might be living under a rock, they are engaged, so who knows? Other artists featured on the bookshelf also passed away in August, including Charles and Ray Eames from this book. And the crazy thing here is that Charles and Ray Eames, who we'll get back to them later and I'll explain who they are, but they both died on August 21st, 12 backwards, exactly 10 years apart from each other. And they were married, so that kind of just gives me the chills. It's like it was written into the stars or something. I don't know. Very Taylor-coded if it was, though. But on a brighter note, there were 2 artists featured on the bookshelf that were born in the month of August, Ai Weiwei and Andy Warhol. And both of their connections to this album and the Easter eggs that they have are insane, but we'll come back to those later. Right now, we need to talk about the artist Donald Judd from this book, because it hides a clue about the number 12. Now, Donald Judd is a minimalist sculptor, and he made a lot of artwork in the 60s and 70s, and he's mostly famous for creating these really big wooden block sculptures in sets of 12. And funny enough, he also passed away on February the 12th. I think that we've just said the number 12 about 12,000 times, but this is Taylor's specialty. She does this on purpose. I mean, she literally did say it in the podcast episode.
And also just, I love numerology. I love math stuff. I love dates. I love that stuff like I find really fun.
But if those numbers weren't enough, we have a couple more important ones that we need to look at. And that's the numbers 2 and 3. However, they have nothing to do with dates. No. These clues are way bigger. If you look around the shelf, there's a couple of artistic duos mentioned. This book, titled Eames, yes, the Charles and Ray Eames that I mentioned earlier, are a married couple of designers, and you might know them because they're the ones that created the Eames chair, aka my dream chair. And then on this book, Basquiat and Warhol are another famous duo for the art that they made in the 1980s New York scene. Andy Warhol is the guy that made the Campbell Soup and Marilyn Monroe paintings. Something a lot of people don't know about their artistic relationship is that it actually got started by mail. They would send half-finished canvases and artworks between themselves and another Italian artist called Francesco Clemente, and they would each kind of finish each other's works as it would go around. But Basquiat and Warhol ended up famously collaborating on a much bigger scale for a lot longer in person. Now, all of this is important because when the news first broke, we kind of assumed that this might be a clue to a potential duo on the album. And it turns out it is, because the last song on the track list is featuring Sabrina Carpenter. So that's the first Easter egg that I think we have debunked. Now back to the number 3. Now, if you look at this book right here, it says Chagall and Lissitzky. And I mean, you can't see the third name because Taylor's shoulder is covering it. But when you zoom out, it's actually this book. It has the artist Malkovich in it as well. So that's 3 artists. So Chagall is known for these very fantastical, dreamy, kind of chalky paintings. And then Lissitzky and Malkovich are known for far more abstract, kind of colder, more sterile works. Malkovich is actually the guy that created that painting, The Black Square, that made people extremely angry, but that's a story for another day. These 3 artists are believed to be a tell towards the production trio that Taylor worked with to create the album: Max Martin, Shellback, and herself. And they also collaborated with her on 3 other albums: Red, 1989, and Reputations. And also, if you notice any details I've missed or cracked an Easter egg for yourself, put it in the comments down below. I will be reading them to find more answers. But these books aren't just clues to important dates or Taylor's obsession with numerology. We need to actually look inside of the book to discover the meaning of the artist's work and their lives, to see what it actually even has to do with the life of a Showgirl album. Just having important dates is about to seem like child's play when we get into this next section, a look in the book. Mark Rothko is going to kick us off with this massive book that's above Taylor's head. Now, Mark Rothko is an abstract expressionist, and he's known for creating these massive paintings with big fields of color. They're called color-filled paintings, to be technical. And the whole point of his paintings is to kind of stir up all of these feelings and sometimes like purposely make you feel overwhelmed with emotion when you're looking at them. So it was kind of hard to detect what clues could be left inside of a painting that's essentially just blobs of color. But then I remembered, Mark Rothko is known for numbering his paintings, and we know our girl loves a number, so of course, I looked up the number 13, her favorite number. And this painting, lo and behold, are the colors orange and green. Now, a little backstory for any of the people that haven't heard of this yet: the colors of the album are orange and green. So that was a big ding, ding, ding. This painting is probably the connection here to that. But of course, I couldn't stop there. And I know. She said, and I said, that none of her Easter eggs point to her personal life, but I couldn't help myself. I also looked at the painting number 12, naturally. And what colors do you think were there for me to find? But yellow and red, and a little bit of white, which happens to be the exact same colors that the Chiefs wear, aka it's basically Travis Kelce's uniform in a painting. So I don't know, having 12 and 13 both have some kind of correlation, it's fishy. And speaking of clues hidden inside of paintings, our next book takes us deeper into the life of a showgirl. Ellsworth Kelly is a minimalist artist known for creating abstract paintings with very few colors. And he was an abstract expressionist as well, like our good buddy Rothko. But unlike Rothko, he actually names his paintings fun names. And this painting in particular is the color orange. But what makes it better and what actually connects it to Taylor is the fact that it's called Broadway, perfectly tying into the whole show business theatricalness of the album, The Life of a Showgirl. And if you haven't noticed by now, a lot of the artists that we've been talking about spent a lot of their lives or their careers in New York City. And I have a theory about that, but I'll tell you later. The next book we're going to look at is this one. It's of the photographer Slim Aarons. Now, he is one of my personal favorite photographers, and he's known for taking these really kind of, I guess, theatrical, you could say. They're very elaborate photos of high society and these lavish, luxurious lifestyles. He's particularly famous for his pictures of pools. And now, there's no obvious connection there until you look a little bit further back in time. Slim Aaron started off his career by photographing Broadway stars doing their headshots and a little bit of behind-the-scenes backstage photography. And in some ways, you can kind of see that more theatrical energy flow from where he got his start to what made him famous. But the next book wasn't so easy to find. Out of all the books, this one, tucked next to Travis's shoulder, right next to the Ellsworth Kelly book, was the one that gave me the most trouble. I could not figure out what it said, but after some hefty research, I figured it out. It's a book about the artist Hilma af Klint. Now, if you haven't heard of her before, I'm going to blow your mind because this woman is a legend, just like Taylor, I guess. Her work has had such a massive impact on art, yet she's still, in some senses, relatively underrated. Now, this woman is so iconic that she was painting abstract artwork in the 1920s, and abstract artwork didn't really become a thing for another, let's say, 40 years, right? So she was way ahead of her time, and she knew that. So in her will, she wrote that nobody was to see, exhibit, or experience her artwork for at least 20 years after she passed away. She knew that her work was so good that people just wouldn't be able to handle it, so she hid it away from us forever. And sadly, no one saw it for about 80 until the Guggenheim Museum in New York did this massive show, and now we finally are able to experience how wonderful she is. But back to the connection between her and Taylor. She's famous for painting symbolism that came to her in a dream, and she also has a really well-known painting series that is numbered. So naturally, I started with 12, 8, and 13. But let's back up for a second and look at the cover of the book. So this book is volume 2 in a series called Paintings for the Temple, and the painting on the cover is called The 10 Largest #1 Childhood. It's a long name, but it's part of a series of paintings that essentially depicts the life of a human being from childhood to adulthood to old age, all through the symbolism that Hilma would have seen in a dream, I guess. And this relates so directly, I think, to the life of a showgirl, because from what Taylor said, this album is going to be about her life behind the scenes while she was on the Eras tour as the showgirl. So it's super symbolic for Hilma's art to be there because it's literally about a whole life cycle. But we also have to look at the Eras tour itself. It was essentially an amalgamation of all of Taylor's music all at once, her entire life in music. So with Hilma's artwork, while very tricky to find, it was a perfect representation of this. But what isn't so direct is the connection with this book at the top of the bookshelf by the artist Daniel Arsham. Now, Daniel Arsham is a contemporary artist known for this thing that he created called future relics. These sculptures where he takes kind of an average everyday object and makes it look old and modern all at the same time. Now, Daniel Arsham has no relation to show business, the month of August, the number 8, 12, or 13. So I was a little bit stumped here until I looked at his name in relation to Broadway. Now, Daniel Arsham did an art installation at a building in New York on Broadway. It's called 530 Broadway. Now, 5 plus 3 plus 0 is 8. So that might be a stretch, but I would not put it past Taylor whatsoever. But I don't know. It almost seemed a little bit too obvious to me, and a little too far away all at the same time. But then I remembered that a lot of Daniel's artwork, specifically the future relics, are encrusted with crystal and gems, much like the costumes that Taylor wears in a lot of the album variants that we've been seeing in the photography around the life of a showgirl. It has all the glitz and glamour of show business. So while 530 Broadway might be kind of a weirdly obvious connection, I think we're gonna go with the crystals here. The crystals likely point to the glitz and the glamour of what it means to be a showgirl and the costumes that Taylor is wearing in the album variants. And I also think that his artwork points to the whole meaning of time and the life cycle thing that we just talked about. It makes us kind of reflect on how even the most familiar of things will eventually age and become a distant era. But if you thought that was this whole big whirlwind, just wait till you hear this. The next artist that we're going to talk about is from this book, and his name is Ai Weiwei. His art is a provocative blend of activism and creativity using sculpture, installation, and social media to challenge authority, advocate for human rights, and essentially question cultural norms. Now, none of this immediately screams Taylor and the life of a showgirl, so I had to go back to Old Faithful, the number 12. In doing so, I discovered that this artist might have the most connections of any artist in this entire video. So let's break them down in order of how crazy the connections are, and we'll save the wildest one for the end. To start off with, he created a series of sculptures of the Chinese zodiacs, which feature 12 bronze animal heads, representing the traditional Chinese zodiac of the rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, goat, monkey, rooster, dog, and the boar. The connection between the album and the sculpture is essentially the passage of time, because the sculpture is a recreation of a fountain clock in the old summer palace in Beijing that I don't believe is there anymore, but I'll have to check that. Each head spouted water at a 2-hour interval corresponding to ancient Chinese timekeeping, but it gets deeper than that. Ai Weiwei has also created a lot of artworks about doors. Now, if we go back to the Eras tour again, Taylor ended the show in the same way every single time, except for the very last show, where instead of exiting the stage in her usual fashion, she turned around and walked to the back of the stage towards an orange door. Now, we now know that that orange door is completely symbolic of the Life of a Showgirl album because orange is the color of the album. Now, in literature and music, doors symbolize time, opportunity, and choice. One of Ai Weiwei's artworks with doors stood out in particular because it also related to the number 12. In 2007, Ai Weiwei participated in the 12th edition of an art festival called Documenta in Germany. And that year's theme asked a particular question about what is modern and what is antiquity, which sort of relates back to Daniel Arsham's work, so I thought we might be onto something here. The piece that he created was called Template, and it was constructed from century-old wooden doors and windows salvaged from demolished Ming and Qing dynasty houses in China, and the pieces were 12 meters wide, forming a fragmented structure that invited people to kind of contemplate the idea of deconstruction and reconstruction. So with all of these doors in number 12s, you'd think that would kind of be the end of the line, right? You would be wrong, because the next one sent me down a rabbit hole. So as I mentioned, Ai Weiwei's work can be quite provocative and challenging of authority, and it's very poking to society. So it might not be the biggest of surprises to you to hear that he was actually once arrested. And back in 2013, a group of young actors in London put on a play about his arrest, which I believe was actually from the opinion of his defense, but that's beside the point. The play was put on at the Hampstead Theatre. Now, for any diehard ultimate Swifties, you will definitely recognize the name Hampstead from the songs So Long London and London Boy. But I hate to break it to you, this isn't the most intense connection to do with Hampstead. So keep Hampstead in mind as we dive into the most important connection of this entire video, and you can find it on the album cover. This is part 3, Ophelia and Elizabeth. So this is the album cover to The Life of a Showgirl, and it's a reference to a very famous painting. But all of this is meaningless if we don't have any music to corroborate it with, and thankfully, Taylor gave us some clues when she released the track list. This is where things are going to really start to come together. The photo is in reference to a painting called Ophelia by the artist John Everett Millay. And this painting is essentially a huge Pandora's box of Easter eggs. So the first thing that you need to know here is the fact that the first song on the track list is called The Fate of Ophelia, which is a reference to the play Hamlet by Shakespeare, and she does explicitly mention this in the New Heights podcast album released episode.
Track 1, The Fate of Ophelia.
Okay.
Track 2.
Okay, go ahead. I was going to say, do you know what Fate of Ophelia is?
Talk about Hamlet?
Hamlet? I don't want to get Jason all riled up.
So Ophelia is kind of this tortured character, and she's also Hamlet's love interest, whose life unravels under the pressures of court intrigue, her father's manipulation, and ultimate death, as well as Hamlet's crazed behavior. Overcome with grief and confusion, she descends into madness, and the play alludes to the fact that she passed away by drowning, and this painting is a depiction of that particular scene. You can see a lot of visual similarities with the way that Taylor is posed with her head back in the water, this very intricate, encrusted, detailed dress that she's wearing, the water kind of coming up to her face, but I got chills when I discovered what I'm about to tell you. So the painting was finished in 1852, and the woman who is in the painting is actually a real person. She's a very famous pre-Raphaelite muse. And the pre-Raphaelites were a group of artists that were creating paintings that look like this. And you can actually see Elizabeth Siddal appearing in a lot of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood paintings. And to pose for this painting in particular, she laid in a bathtub in a wedding dress. Very theatrical. But Elizabeth wasn't just a muse. She was an artist and a poet herself, but unfortunately, her career was seemingly overshadowed by the men who painted her. You could say she was a tortured poet. But if you can believe it, the connections don't stop there, because Elizabeth is actually buried from the neighborhood over from Hampstead in a place called Highgate Cemetery. Now, Highgate is another place that Taylor mentioned in the song London Boy, so it's likely Taylor will have known about Elizabeth and could have possibly visited her grave. So remember how I told you to remember Hampstead? Well, here's why. The second song on the track list is called Elizabeth Taylor. Now, Elizabeth Taylor is an iconic actress known for her incredible roles in movies and her very glamorous personal life. And she was actually born in Hampstead. But how does that relate to Taylor? Well, her last album is called The Tortured Poets Department, a place that Elizabeth Siddal would seemingly be an automatic member of. Not only that, but Elizabeth Taylor was often described as a tortured starlet in popular culture because despite the fame and the beauty, she endured a lot of personal struggles, including intense media scrutiny. And who does that remind us of? Miss Taylor Allison Swift. These three women could form the tortured trifecta, but what sets Taylor apart, especially when you look at the painting of Ophelia, is that unlike Elizabeth in that painting, Taylor is looking directly at you, as if to say, you really think that you could stop me? You really think that you could get me down? I could do that with a broken heart. But what do I think of all of this at the grand scheme of things? Well, I don't think Taylor's going to be going on tour with any of this music in the way that we're used to. I think that she's going to write and perform a Broadway play that shows the tortured life of a beloved showgirl. So now we've deciphered all of the Easter eggs hidden in the art books behind Taylor, but until you dig a little deeper into art history, you might miss them next time. So check out this video to discover an art mystery that remains unsolved for over 30 years.